Well, now that I have my top 10 best movies of 2023 out of the way, let's talk about my top 10 worst movies of the year. Funny enough, this wasn't a bad year for movies by any means. In fact, numbers 10 through 2 on this list, I would say in a really bad year for movies, would maybe not even be on my top 10 worst of the year list. The only one that deserves it is the first, but everything else on this list wasn't that bad. But either way, this is my top 10 worst movies of 2023, so all numbers 10 through 1 deserve to be on this year's list. So without further ado, let's get started with
Number 10.
Number 10 is Meg 2: The Trench. The Meg movies are what they are. The first film is fun. It has Jason Statham versus a giant megalodon. It's a movie that knows exactly what it is. As for Meg 2, it gives us all of that, plus even more, because in this film we get more sharks, but it takes it a step too far. Beyond Statham, the acting is bad, the CGI is no better, it's over the top, and for whatever reason, the movie takes a horrible detour involving a trench walk that rarely includes the sharks. What were you thinking with that 30-minute sequence? It felt like the film Underwater from 2020, except a lot worse.
Number 9.
Number 9 is Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. It's truly a shame what happened to this movie. You can tell it's unfinished and rushed. Coming off the heels of the first Aquaman movie, this should have been an epic sequel with better looking CGI and better storytelling. Black Manta is wasted, the dialogue at times is horrific as well, just an anticlimactic poor follow-up.
Number 8.
Number 8 is Five Nights at Freddy's. When I made this list, I was surprised I included Five Nights at Freddy's because when I first watched the film, I didn't think it was the worst thing I've ever seen, let alone that I think it would make my top 10 worst movies of the year. But now here we are. It doesn't capture the same vibe of the games. I wouldn't call this movie scary by any means. The film focuses more on a kidnapping backstory than the actual animatronics. And the second lead character was the most useless character in all of film in 2023. And unfortunately now I have Five Nights at Freddy's on 4K thanks to my roommate. Yeah, that's gonna sit on my shelf for an eternity.
Number 7.
Number 7 is Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Indy 5 is more so on this list because it was the most disappointing movie of the year. I can't believe whoever was at Lucasfilm watched the final cut of this movie and figured this would be the best version of the film to be shown in theaters. The film is flowing with subpar CGI. Indiana Jones has as much energy as a nursing home resident. It's way too long and feels so unnecessary. Crystal Skull would have been a fine ending.
Number 6.
Number 6 is 65. I had high hopes for 65, but compared to films with a similar premise, 65 is lackluster. Unfortunately, the dinosaurs don't look great. I didn't feel a connection between the two leads, Adam Driver and the little girl. It didn't work for me. Sadly, the movie as a whole feels rather cheap.
Number 5.
Number 5 is Shazam! Fury of the Gods. Trust me, I never thought Shazam 2 would land in my top 10 worst movies of the year until James Gunn made that announcement about the DCEU. Wow, that's actually 2 DCEU sequels that landed in my top 10 worst of the year. I was never the biggest fan of the first movie, and I was tired of superhero films at this point. Unfortunately for Shazam 2, it did nothing for me. This film offers nothing new or original. It's as generic as it gets outside of the humor.
Number 4.
Number 4 is Scream 6. Again, this is kind of a pattern with my top 10 worst of the year. A year that wasn't surprisingly terrible for films. It just so happens that there were a lot of disappointing movies and sequels that were lackluster to me, and Scream 6 was one of those. After a while, a franchise begins feeling redundant, and at this point, I think the Scream franchise should die. It really irritated me. Scream 6 took no chances. They just copy and pasted the 5th movie and placed it in New York City. There's no surprises anymore with the Scream franchise. Scream 5 was fine. It was a movie that came out 11 years after the previous film. Whatever. I don't really care. I'm just so happy that Scream 7 is in development hell now, because we don't need that movie, just like we didn't need Scream 6.
Number 3.
Number 3 is Knock at the Cabin. This one really hurts because I briefly met M. Night Shyamalan in 2019. I think the guy is great. He is a legend around my area in Philadelphia, so it pains me every time I put one of his recent movies in my top 10 worst of the year. But that's just how it played out with Knock at the Cabin. I found the execution and acting underwhelming. Plot-wise, the movie doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I wasn't a fan of the ending, and when watching from beginning to end, I'm not sure why M. Night chose to adapt this to the big screen. To make matters even worse, I actually worked on the promotional shoot for the posters and marketing for Knock at the Cabin. I saw guys like Rupert Grint and Dave Bautista. That was so cool, but movie-wise, Knock at the Cabin was not.
Number 2.
Number 2 is Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Wow, what a surprise. Another big budget sequel lands in my top 10 worst of the year. It seems like this pattern just keeps going and going. You can blame Marvel for treating this movie as important when it shouldn't have, but for me, this was kind of like the Multiverse of Madness from last year. I had high expectations and was let down. The CGI is a mess, Kang didn't impress me as the new Thanos, the first hour is a chore to get through, and the tone switches far too often. Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania should have been a much smaller film in terms of scale.
Number 1.
Number 1 is Expendables 4. Is it any shock to you Expendables 4 was the worst movie I saw in 2023? Again, this was a movie I had decent expectations for. The Expendables franchise is a lot of fun. I liked the second movie a whole lot, and the third movie is not bad. But this one was truly awful. I have no idea why Expendables 4 was made. It's very anticlimactic, nobody is well utilized, there are plenty of head-scratching creative decisions, and the CGI is some of the worst I've ever seen. It looks like it was taken from a Dreamcast game. The franchise knew what it was before, but with the fourth entry, this was a total embarrassment. Sylvester Stallone didn't seem like he cared. I don't know why they made this movie when the last entry came out 9 years ago. It doesn't make sense. Why make another Expendables movie when it's going to be this bad? Alright, so there you have it. Those were my top 10 worst movies of 2023. But of course, I want to hear your top 10 list. What are your top 10 worst movies of the year? Let me know down below in the comment section. As always, thank you all so much for watching my videos in 2023. I can't wait for an epic 2024, and I will see you all next time.